Hello and welcome. Today we are talking about colons and semicolons. The objectives for today. We're going to learn several ways to use a colon. We're going to learn several ways to use a semicolon. Some vocabulary terms we need to review. A positive phrase. Here's a simple definition of an appositive phrase. It's a word or phrase that elaborates, and it elaborates on a noun, sometimes a pronoun, and we're going to look at a few examples of those. A clause. You may remember from before, it is a miniature sentence. And what does a miniature sentence has to have? It has to have a subject and a predicate or a verb. Conjunctive adverb, that is a word or phrase that joins two ideas. We're going to learn how to use a conjunctive adverb with a semicolon and a comma. Colons, we're going to start with those. And we're going to start with the easy, common ways to use a colon. We use these already, and we probably don't make a lot of mistakes with them because we've been doing it all this time. The first one is when we're talking about what time of the day it is, 3 o'clock p.m. So we just use a colon in a case like that. Also, we would use a colon there if we're going to separate the minutes from the seconds. We would use something very similar if we're talking about degrees of longitude or latitude. Greeting of a letter, this is an important one. So in a business letter, especially if we're starting with to whom it may concern, we'll use a colon there. In a personal letter, like dear mom, dear dad, that's probably going to be a comma, not a colon. Titles and subtitles. Let's say the title of the book is Colorado, and then the subtitle is A Centennial State. This is how we would write it maybe on the cover of the book. That's how it would be. Or if we were referencing it in a bibliography, then we would do that. And then verses. So a common Bible verse would be like the chapter separating the verse. We would do that with other religious texts. Other things I did not put on here would be like a newspaper. If you're quoting like a really old newspaper, then it might be the section of the newspaper followed by the column. So colons are just used in different ways. If you're stuck on how to use the colon in these little ways, I would look them up, especially in the style manual that's appropriate. Like if you're using MLA format, just look it up that way and you'll find it there. When you're doing your own writing, though, if you're using a colon in a sentence, you want to make sure you have a pretty good mastery of it because looking it up may not be that useful. So you can use a colon to introduce an important idea. Let's look at an example. The movie has a simple plot, colon, boy meets girl. Notice that one complete sentence, the movie has a simple plot, is the beginning. It is a simple sentence because it has a subject, movie, and a verb, has. And this is the direct object. This could stand alone. The movie has a simple plot, period. That would be fine. But we want to make it a little more complex, a little more sophisticated. It is followed by another complete sentence, or we would say another clause, because it's part of a sentence. So a clause has to have a subject, boy, and a verb, predicate, meets. And then girl is the direct object. So that one could also stand alone. And the colon is introducing this idea because this idea is kind of the gem. It's the nugget. This we could say is the setting. Like this is the ring. This is the gem. We could say this is the frame. This is the picture. But this is the important idea. This is saying, hey, look, pay attention. Road sign there is about to be an important idea. So that's a good place to use a colon. We also use a colon to introduce a list. The dog has a busy morning schedule, colon. He naps in front of the stairs. He smells everything in the yard, and he sheds. So notice that we are still introducing this with a clause. The dog is the subject. Has is the simple predicate or the verb. And then busy morning is the direct object. Actually, schedule is the direct object. Everything that comes after schedule is elaborating on schedule. It's like clarifying it. So it comes right after schedule. That's good placement. We want to do that if we can, because this the thing that elaborates, the modifier, should be next to the thing that it modifies. Okay, so notice that one introductory clause in this case is followed by three details, each one an independent clause. So each one of these is a little miniature sentence. He, the subject, naps is the verb. Subject, verb, and subject, verb, he sheds. So they're parallel. We are connecting clauses. We're not connecting prepositional phrases and clauses. They have to be similar. And then each one of those is separated by a comma. Notice that there is a comma between the first and second and between the second and third. This one, according to some style manuals, is optional. I, however, lean towards saying do it because there are many cases where that comma is important. Okay, so again, they're parallel. In this case, they're all miniature clauses, so that works. This one is a little bit different. We are still using the colon to introduce a list, but the nature of the list is different. I have a number of items to buy at the grocery store, colon, eggs, milk, butter, cheese, and bread. Notice that these things, these items, are elaborating on the word items. They're clarifying which items. Items should probably come right before the colon in this case. In this case it doesn't, but I left it this way because I think the meaning of the sentence is still clear. But in an ideal world, we would have items coming right there, and then we're jumping off. The colon says to the reader, now these are the items that we're going to buy. So the beginning of the sentence is still a clause. I, the subject, have the predicate. That is important. We have to have some independent clause in a sentence. Something's got to stand alone. Something's got to have a subject and a verb. But everything that comes after that is not. It's just simple nouns. Those aren't even prepositional phrases. They're just nouns. And they're listed and they're parallel with each other. So it's important that if we're listing clauses, we're listing clauses. If we're listing participle phrases, we're listing those. In this case, we're just listing items. We're listing items on a list. And then we have a comma there before the and. I recommend doing that. Should a colon be used to introduce an appositive phrase? So let's look at that and then we'll review what an appositive phrase is. The protective case comes in two colors, black and gray. So black and gray is the appositive phrase. Those are two nouns, in this case they're being used as nouns, clarifying this noun, colors. So this works. This is, according to some style manuals, this works just fine, but perhaps a simple comma would work just as well. So here's another option that I think we have for this sentence. Just using a comma there, because this isn't a positive phrase, and a positive phrase that is non-essential, and it comes after the word colors, the word that it modifies. So again, I lean towards this one. I don't think we want to overuse the colon. I think we want to use the colon sparingly. And if we can use a comma, why not just use a comma? Because that's how we would use it with other appositive phrases. Okay, and then notice too that the appositive phrase has to be connected to the word that it is clarifying. It can't come somewhere else. Okay, so it is right next to the noun that it clarifies. They're right next to each other. Semicolons, related ideas. The colon, as you remember, had a lot of little ways to use it, like time, newspaper articles, titles, things like that. The semicolon does not have as many little uses. There's only really one that I could think of to include in this presentation, and that is to use a semicolon when a comma isn't enough. And this is a common example. When we're talking about cities and we're clarifying which state. So we drove through Denver, Colorado, Kansas City, Missouri, and Chicago, Illinois. Really what we're listing here is cities. We're not listing states. The states are just along for the ride. But when we include the state, we have it after the city with a comma. If we did not have a comma or semicolon here, if we just had a comma, we would be mixing unparalleled items together. Because Denver is a city, Colorado is a state, and then we have them all mixed together and it's all jumbled. And so somebody maybe from a foreign country would be very confused because maybe they don't know that Denver is a city, Colorado is a state. And that's why we want to do that. We want to be parallel, and so we separate those big ideas with semicolons. So how many big ideas do we have? Well, we have three. We're listing three items. Okay, enough of that one. We also use a semicolon in a compound sentence, and here it gets a little trickier. My brother collects action figures, semicolon. My sister makes decorative pot holders. Notice that these two ideas are parallel. They are also related. Let's look at them more closely. It's a compound sentence. Compound sentence means we have two or more independent clauses. My brother collects action figures. Yes, that is an independent clause. Brother is the subject, collects is the predicate, simple predicate. And so that could stand alone. I could put a period there and we could start a new sentence with my sister makes decorative pot holders. Sister is the subject, makes is the verb. But I want to show that they're related, and that's why I've used a semicolon there. I could also use a comma and a coordinated conjunction and say but. But in this case, I originally typed that and I looked at it again and said, well, but's not the right conjunction for that because they're just two parallel ideas, but they're related. So when a conjunction isn't necessary or it's better without a conjunction, you always have that option of making a compound sentence with a semicolon. But it is super important that this is a complete sentence and this is a complete sentence. We don't use them to list items. That's a colon. So we don't want to have participle phrases on either side of that. It's got to be independent clauses on both sides of the semicolon. Okay, so we can use a semicolon with a conjunctive adverb, and this is really common. My dad has an unusual taste, or has unusual taste in food, semicolon, for example, comma, he won't go near cantaloupe unless it's salted. Okay, in this case, we have two independent clauses. We always have to have that with a semicolon. This could stand alone. Dad is the subject, has is the predicate. He is the subject, won't is the predicate. So there have to be two miniature sentences. Notice both of those could stand alone if they had to. He won't go near cantaloupe unless it's salted. That could stand alone. And this conjunctive adverb that is putting them together it has to come after the semicolon before the comma. It's got to look that way or it is not proper. And I've seen students mix them up. They say, oh, the comma there and the semicolon there. Well, think of it this way. For example is the example, saying the example is coming. The cantaloupe story is an example. This is not an example. So since it is coming with the for example is going with the cantaloupe, then it should be joined with a comma because a comma is not as harsh. The semicolon is a stronger divider, so it needs to go there. But it always goes first. Conjunctive adverbs that you can use, there are a lot of them. We're going to look at just a few of them, but there are many that you can use. Here are some that show elaboration. So for example, for instance, specifically, namely could work. But they say that we're going to elaborate, we're going to clarify, we're going to illustrate, we're going to show you what's happening, we're going to make it a little clearer. Notice too, they're different forms. For example, what is that? What kind of phrase? Yes, it is a prepositional phrase. For is the preposition, example is the object of the preposition. But it is being used as an adverb. Specifically, well, we have learned that things that end in ly very often are adverbs. So all of these are adverbs even though they're words or phrases. We can also use them for contradiction. And sometimes we say these are switchback words. And these work really well with semicolons. That's why I included them. So, however, in contrast, still, on the other hand, that's a long one. All of those are good for saying look at another side of something or look at the converse of something. And then we can also use them with conclusions. And a lot of times in our 5-paragraph essays, we need to include conclusions, and we want to make them as interesting as we can. Conclusions are hard to write, but these are some tricks for concluding things. Therefore, thus, consequently, eventually, all of those can work. I see these more as happening within a body paragraph, but sometimes we need to use them in a concluding paragraph as well. Okay, we're going to look at one more semicolon with a conjunctive adverb because I only gave you one example. So I would love to tell you more about punctuation, semicolon, however, comma, we're out of time in this episode. Let's look at it again. This first part is a complete sentence. I would love is the verb. We're out of time. We're is the subject. Are is the verb, even though it's joined there with a contraction. So we have to have 2 independent clauses, and then we have to have the semicolon, the conjunctive adverb, and the comma. I would encourage you to experiment with this form to use the conjunctive adverb, just as I would encourage you to use the colon. Use the colon to introduce a list or to introduce an important idea. However, don't overuse them. You don't want to use 12 of these structures, this structure. You don't want to use it 12 times in one paper or 3 times in one paragraph because it gets kind of old and the reader gets a little bored with it. Same with the colon. So just use it as a tool, put it in your toolbox, and use it sparingly. Did we meet our objectives for today? Yes. We learned several ways to use a colon, easy ways and more complicated ways to use them. And then we also learned several ways to use a semicolon. One easy way, like cities and states, and then more complicated ways, like when we see them in sentences. If you have any questions, let me know. That is all that we have for today.